Keep quiet! You don't get to talk to me in such manner.
You don't belong in first class. The words cut through the cabin like a knife. Two 10-year-old girls. One black, one white. Both sitting in the luxury of first class on a transatlantic flight. But here's where it gets interesting. One of these girls comes from a family whose father owns not just one, but an entire fleet of private jets. The other? Her family just scraped together enough money to afford these first-class tickets, barely avoiding the humiliation of flying economy. But which girl is which? Stay with me because the answer will shock you. And trust me, by the end of this story you'll understand why assumptions about wealth, race and privilege can be so dangerously wrong. This is a story about dignity, discrimination, and a 10-year-old girl who taught an entire airplane cabin what true class really means. Let me take you back to where it all began. Welcome to Living Black Stories. Here we share powerful and inspiring tales of resilience, strength and triumph. If you love stories that empowers and motivates you, please join us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Her name was Zephyr Okafor. And if you're wondering about that name, yes, it's as unique as the girl who carries it. Zephyr. Like the gentle west wind. Her mother chose it deliberately, hoping her daughter would move through the world with that same quiet power. Subtle but undeniable. At just 10 years old, Zephyr was boarding a flight from Lagos, Nigeria to New York City. Alone. Now, before you start wondering what kind of parents let their 10-year-old fly internationally by herself, understand this. Zephyr wasn't your typical 10-year-old. And her mother, Dr. Chimamanda Okafor, wasn't your typical parent. Chimamanda had built Africa's largest cloud computing company from nothing. Absolutely nothing. She'd started in a cramped apartment in Lagos with a used laptop and a vision that most people called impossible. 15 years later, her company was valued at over $8 billion. Billion. With a B. That made Zephyr, technically speaking, a billionaire's daughter. But you'd never know it by looking at her. As Zephyr walked through the Lagos airport that morning, she looked like any other kid. Her natural hair was styled in butterfly locks that cascaded past her shoulders, each one carefully done by her aunt the week before. She wore a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans with a small paint stain on the knee from art class, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. No designer labels. No flashy jewelry. Nothing that screamed wealth or privilege. Slung over her shoulder was a backpack covered in pins. Science puns mostly. Her favorite read, "I have my eye on you," with a little cartoon atom. She thought it was hilarious. She was still a kid after all. In her hands she clutched a book. But this wasn't Harry Potter or Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The title read, Introduction to Quantum Mechanics. Yes, quantum mechanics. At 10 years old. But here's the thing about Zephyr. She didn't read it to show off. She read it because she genuinely found it fascinating. The way particles could exist in multiple states at once, the way observation changed reality. It made sense to her in a way that most things didn't. Oversized headphones rested around her neck, the kind that cancel out noise. She'd need those on the flight. Not for music, though she did love music. Specifically, she had a secret obsession with animated movie soundtracks. Encanto, Moana, Frozen. She could sing every word to We Don't Talk About Bruno, and frequently did, much to her mother's amused embarrassment. But the headphones were mainly for focus. For blocking out the world when it got too loud, too overwhelming. Because despite her intelligence, despite her achievements, Zephyr was still a 10-year-old girl about to fly across the ocean alone. And she was nervous. Terrified, actually. But she'd never admit it. Her mother had taught her something from the earliest age Zephyr could remember. Money doesn't make you better than anyone, Chimamanda would say, kneeling down to look her daughter in the eyes. Character does. Kindness does. How you treat people when you have power over them. That's what defines you. Zephyr carried those words with her everywhere. They'd shaped her into someone observant, quiet, thoughtful. She watched people. She noticed things. The way adults talked to service workers. The way kids treated each other on the playground. She saw everything, absorbed everything, said little. So why was this brilliant, wealthy, mature beyond her years child flying alone to New York? MIT. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. One of the world's most prestigious universities was hosting the Global Youth Science Summit. And Zephyr hadn't just been invited. She'd been specifically recruited. At 9 years old, she designed a solar-powered water filtration system that was now being used in 12 rural communities across Nigeria, providing clean drinking water to over 15,000 people. 15,000 lives changed by a child's invention. MIT wanted her there. They wanted her to present her research. They wanted her to meet other young scientists. They wanted to show the world what brilliance looked like when it came in a small package with butterfly locks and a hoodie. Her mother had wanted to come, of course. Chimamanda would have dropped everything to accompany her daughter. But Zephyr had insisted she could do this alone. She needed to prove to herself that she could. That she was brave enough, strong enough, independent enough. So there she was, clutching her boarding pass for seat 2A, first class, walking down the jet bridge with her heart hammering in her chest, trying to look confident even though her hands were shaking slightly. She was about to learn a lesson that no science textbook could teach her. Meanwhile, just a few passengers behind her, another 10-year-old girl was boarding the same flight. Her name was Sutton Bellamy Cross. And yes, she insisted on both last names. Always. The hyphen was important to her family. It suggested legacy, prestige, old money. Except there wasn't any old money. There wasn't much money at all anymore. Sutton's father, Gregory Cross, had been a mid-level sales executive at a pharmaceutical company. Had been. Past tense. 6 months ago he'd been laid off in a corporate restructuring. The severance package had been decent but not enough. Not nearly enough to maintain the lifestyle the Bellamy Cross family had built their entire identity around. But they kept pretending. Kept up appearances. Because in their social circle, in their community, perception was everything. Sutton looked the part of a wealthy child. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect beach waves, the kind that took her mother Veronica 45 minutes and 3 different heat tools to achieve that morning. She wore a pink designer dress. Well, it looked designer. Veronica had found an incredibly convincing knockoff online for $37 instead of the $300 original. Patent leather shoes that pinched Sutton's toes. A small handbag that was absolutely real leather, purchased back when money wasn't quite so tight. She wore pearl earrings, a delicate gold bracelet, and carried herself with a practiced confidence that she'd learned from watching her mother navigate country club brunches and charity galas. But underneath all that polish, Sutton was deeply, profoundly insecure. She knew things had changed at home, even if her parents never explicitly said it. She'd noticed the whispered arguments late at night. The way her father's jaw clenched when bills arrived. The fact that they'd quietly canceled their family vacation to the Hamptons, making excuses about scheduling conflicts. The way her mother had started buying store-brand groceries and hiding the packages before anyone could see. Sutton had gone from private school to public school last year. Her parents called it, wanting a more diverse educational experience. But Sutton had seen the tuition bill on the counter before her mother quickly tucked it away. She knew the real reason. And it terrified her. Because in Sutton's world, your worth was measured by what you had, where you went, who you knew. If they were losing those things, what did that make them? Her mother, Veronica Bellamy Cross, walked beside her through the airport like she owned it. Veronica was 42 but looked 35, thanks to regular facials, careful makeup application, and Botox she claimed was just good skincare. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit with enormous sunglasses perched on her head, even though they were indoors. Her highlighted hair was blown out perfectly, and she carried a handbag that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. That one at least was real. Purchased 3 years ago when Gregory got his Christmas bonus. Veronica had spent the last 5 months saving for these first-class tickets to New York. Literally saving every spare dollar. Skipping her weekly manicures. Buying the cheaper wine. Also they could visit Gregory's family in Manhattan and maintain the illusion that everything was fine. That they were still successful. Still comfortable. Still worthy of respect. She'd rather die than let anyone know the truth. As they walked through the airport, Veronica kept up a constant stream of commentary. Oh, look at that boutique. Reminds me of the little shop in Paris. You remember Paris, don't you, darling? Such a lovely trip. They'd never been to Paris. We should stop by the Hamptons this summer. It's been too long since we've seen the Vanderbilts. They didn't know any Vanderbilts. Sutton had learned to nod along to play her part in the performance. But she'd also learned something else from her parents. Something more insidious. She'd learned that there were different types of people in the world. Our kind of people, her mother would say, and everyone else. Our kind of people dressed properly, spoke properly, came from the right backgrounds, lived in the right neighborhoods. And people who weren't their kind? Well, Veronica had plenty of coded language for them. Urban. Ethnic. Those people. Never explicit racism, nothing you could quite call out, but the meaning was always clear. Sutton had absorbed these lessons like a sponge absorbs water. Unconsciously. Completely. She didn't even realize she'd learned to look down on people based on how they looked, how they spoke, the color of their skin. She just thought that was how the world worked. At 10 years old, Sutton Bellamy Cross was a child shaped by her parents' prejudices, her family's insecurities, and a desperate need to feel superior to someone, anyone, because deep down she felt so small. She had no idea she was about to come face to face with someone who would challenge everything she'd been taught. The moment came at 6:47 a.m., Gate B-17, as passengers began boarding the Lagos to New York flight. First class was called first, naturally. Zephyr clutched her boarding pass tighter, took a deep breath, and walked down the jet bridge. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "You can do this, my love. You're stronger than you know." She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a kind-faced woman named Marissa Chin who smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard, sweetheart. First time flying alone?" Zephyr nodded, not trusting her voice. "You're going to do great," Marissa said softly. "I'll check on you during the flight, okay?" That small kindness made Zephyr's eyes prickle with tears, but she blinked them back and nodded again. She made her way down the narrow aisle to seat 2A. Window seat. Her mother had specifically chosen it, knowing Zephyr would want to look out at the clouds, at the world from above. She stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment, keeping only her book and headphones, and slid into her seat. The leather was soft. The seat was huge compared to her small frame. There was so much legroom. She'd never flown first class before. Her mother insisted they typically fly economy, even though they could afford private jets. "We don't need to be wasteful," Chimamanda always said. But for this trip, for her daughter flying alone, she'd made an exception. Zephyr opened her quantum mechanics book but couldn't focus on the words. She was too aware of every sound, every movement around her. That's when she heard the voice. Veronica Bellamy Cross swept into first class like she was arriving at a red carpet event, Sutton trailing behind her. Veronica's eyes swept the cabin, cataloging who was there, what they wore, whether they belonged in her mental hierarchy of society. And then she saw Zephyr. A young black girl. Sitting alone. In first class. Wearing a hoodie. Veronica's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. She leaned down to Sutton, and in a stage whisper that absolutely carried across the quiet cabin, she said, "I wonder how she afforded first class." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Thick. Suffocating. Unmistakable. Zephyr's hands tightened on her book. Every muscle in her body went rigid. She'd heard the comment. Everyone had heard the comment. But she kept her eyes fixed on the page in front of her, even though the words had become meaningless symbols. She'd been taught to ignore comments like that, to rise above them, to not give people the satisfaction of a reaction. But God, it hurt. It always hurt. Veronica and Sutton settled into seats 3C and 3D, directly across the aisle and one row back from Zephyr. Close enough to watch her. Close enough to make her feel observed, judged, scrutinized. Marissa Chin, the flight attendant who'd been so kind at the gate, made her way down the aisle with her welcoming smile. "Good morning. Welcome to Flight 447 to New York. We're so happy to have you with us today." She stopped at Zephyr's row first. "Sweetheart, can I get you anything before we take off? Some water? Orange juice?" Zephyr's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Water, please. Thank you." "Of course, honey." Marissa's smile was genuine, warm. She moved across the aisle. "And for you ladies?" Veronica's smile was different. "Practiced. Social. Champagne for me. My daughter will have apple juice. We're celebrating. Family trip to New York. Visiting relatives in Manhattan. The Upper East Side, of course." "Of course" was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Marissa nodded pleasantly and continued down the aisle. Sutton twisted in her seat to look at Zephyr. She didn't say anything, but her stare was pointed, judgmental. She'd learned that look from her mother. The one that said, "You don't belong here." Zephyr could feel it burning into the side of her face. She pulled her headphones up over her ears and closed her eyes, willing herself to disappear into the music. The Encanto soundtrack started playing. Mirabelle singing about magic and family and not being good enough. How perfectly, painfully appropriate. As the plane filled with passengers and the flight attendants went through their safety demonstration, nobody in that first-class cabin could have predicted what was about to unfold. Nobody knew that the quiet girl in the hoodie was one of the most brilliant young minds in the world. That her mother's name appeared regularly in Forbes and Fortune magazines. That the Okafor Foundation had donated millions to education and technology initiatives across 3 continents. And nobody knew that the perfectly dressed girl with the designer clothes and pearl earrings was hanging on to her family's social status by a thread. That her father was desperately job hunting. That her mother was drowning in credit card debt trying to maintain appearances. 2 girls. Both 10 years old. both carrying weights that children shouldn't have to carry. One taught to be humble despite having everything. The other taught to be arrogant while having nothing. The plane's engines roared to life. The cabin lights dimmed. And as Flight 447 lifted off the runway, climbing into the Lagos morning sky, a confrontation was brewing at 30,000 feet. A confrontation about race and privilege and assumptions. About dignity and cruelty and what it means to truly have class. Before I continue with what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If this story is resonating with you, if you want to see how Zephyr handles what's coming, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story gets intense, it gets emotional, and you're not going to want to miss a single moment. And here's a question I want you to think about. Have you ever been in a situation where someone judged you based on how you looked? Where someone made assumptions about who you were, what you deserved, where you belonged? Drop your story in the comments. Because Zephyr's story? It's about to become all too relatable for far too many of us. The plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And in the quiet hum of the aircraft, with clouds stretching endlessly outside the window, Zephyr Okafor had no idea that her ability to defend herself, her dignity, and her humanity was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. What happened in the next hour would shock everyone on that plane. And it starts with something as simple and as devastating as a trip to the bathroom. But that's a story for the next part of our journey. The first 30 minutes of the flight passed in tense silence. Well, silence from Zephyr at least. Sutton and her mother Veronica kept up their performance, their voices carrying across the first-class cabin with that particular volume that suggested they wanted to be overheard. Then it started. The microaggressions. Those small cuts that don't leave visible wounds but hurt just as much. Sutton stretched in her seat, making a show of looking around the cabin, and then said loudly to her mother, "Mom, can everyone afford first class now? It seems so different than it used to be." The pause before different was deliberate. Pointed. Veronica didn't even glance at Zephyr, but her response was clearly meant to be heard. "Oh, sweetheart, I suppose they must have programs for that now. You know, diversity initiatives. Airlines trying to look inclusive. Very modern of them. Programs. Diversity initiatives." As if Zephyr's presence in first class couldn't possibly be legitimate. As if she must have gotten there through charity, through some handout, through anything except the simple fact that her ticket had been purchased just like everyone else's. Actually, here's the irony that neither Sutton nor Veronica knew. Zephyr's ticket hadn't just been purchased. It had been upgraded. By the airline. Because when the booking system flagged that Dr. Chimamanda Okafor's daughter was flying alone, the airline's executive team had personally ensured she'd have the most comfortable experience possible. They'd moved her from the economy seat her mother had originally booked, all the way to first class, seat 2A. Complimentary. But Zephyr didn't say any of that. She couldn't. Her throat felt tight, like she'd swallowed something sharp. Her hands gripped her quantum mechanics book so hard that her knuckles lost their color, the brown skin stretched pale over bone. She kept her eyes fixed on the page. Quantum superposition. The concept that particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. She wished she could exist in a superposition right now. Present and absent. Here and somewhere else. Visible and invisible. But she was very much here. Very much visible. Very much the target. Marissa Chin, the flight attendant, made her way down the aisle with a practiced smile and a basket. "Good morning, ladies. We have some activity books for our younger passengers. Would either of you like one?" She offered the basket to Sutton first. Inside were coloring books, crossword puzzles, word searches. Simple entertainment for children on a long flight. Sutton wrinkled her nose. "No thank you. I'm 10 not 5. The disdain in her voice was thick. Marissa's smile never wavered. "Of course. And for you, sweetheart?" She turned to Zephyr. Zephyr looked up from her book. Marissa's eyes were kind. There was something in them, some flicker of awareness, like she'd heard the earlier comments and was trying to offer a small moment of normalcy, of kindness. "Yes, please," Zephyr said softly. "Thank you." As Zephyr reached for a coloring book and the small pack of crayons, Sutton's voice cut through again. "Why does she get one? I thought those were for children." The implication was clear. If Sutton was too mature for a coloring book, then Zephyr accepting one meant she was childish. Immature. Lesser. But Zephyr had learned something from her mother. Sometimes the best response to cruelty is to simply continue being yourself. To not let other people's judgment change your actions. She took the coloring book, thanked Marissa again and returned to her seat. But she didn't color the pre-drawn pictures of airplanes and clouds. Instead, she flipped to a blank page in the back and began sketching. With careful, precise lines she drew circuit diagrams. The water filtration system she'd designed. Solar panels connected to purification chambers, voltage regulators, capacitors. It was intricate, technical, beautiful in its complexity. This wasn't a child's drawing. This was engineering. Sutton craned her neck to see what Zephyr was doing, but from her angle, it just looked like random lines and symbols. She turned back to her mother with a confused expression. "She's probably just scribbling," Veronica whispered, but loud enough for Zephyr to hear. "Pretending to be smart." Zephyr's hand paused for just a moment. Then she continued drawing. Each line was an act of quiet defiance. Each carefully rendered component was proof that she belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing. But the tension was building. Like pressure in a closed system. Like potential energy waiting to become kinetic. Something had to give. About 45 minutes into the flight, Zephyr needed to use the bathroom. It was a simple, basic human need. But even that was about to become complicated. She unbuckled her seatbelt, carefully placed her book and drawings on her seat, and made her way down the narrow aisle toward the first-class lavatory. Her heart was beating faster than it should for such a simple task, but she'd felt Sutton's eyes on her the entire time. Watching. Waiting. The bathroom was small but clean. Zephyr used it quickly, washed her hands, dried them on the soft cloth towel. She took an extra moment to look at herself in the mirror. Her butterfly locks were slightly messy from the headphones. Her eyes looked tired. She looked like what she was. A 10-year-old girl, far from home, trying to be brave. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "Just a few more hours." She opened the door. And Sutton was standing right there. Waiting. Zephyr's stomach dropped. She'd hoped Sutton's presence near the bathroom was coincidental. But the look on Sutton's face, the way she was positioned, deliberately blocking the narrow path back to the seats, made it clear this was intentional. "Excuse me," Zephyr said politely, trying to move past. Sutton didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head, a gesture she'd seen her mother make 1,000 times. A gesture of judgment. Of superiority. "My mom says your people probably snuck into first class," Sutton said. Not quietly. Not as a whisper. Loud enough that anyone nearby could hear. "Your people." 2 words that reduced Zephyr's entire identity, her entire humanity, to nothing but the color of her skin. Zephyr felt like she'd been slapped. The casual cruelty of it. The way Sutton said it so matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather. Like she'd been taught that this was an acceptable thing to say. An acceptable way to view other human beings. "Please move," Zephyr said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. But Sutton wasn't done. She stepped closer, and Zephyr could see something in the other girl's eyes. Not just prejudice. Something else. Insecurity. Fear. Like Sutton needed to prove something, needed to push someone else down to feel higher up herself. "Did you steal someone's ticket?" Sutton asked. "Is that how you got here? Did you take something that wasn't yours?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. The criminal. Sutton wasn't just questioning Zephyr's right to be in first class. She was questioning her character. Her morality. Her worth as a human being. Zephyr's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to push past, to say something cutting, to defend herself. But her mother's voice echoed in her head. "When people show you who they are, believe them. But don't let them change who you are. Please. Move." Zephyr repeated, each word deliberate. Sutton smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd found a weakness and wanted to exploit it. "You should be in the back of the plane." The back of the plane. Those words had history. Terrible history. Rosa Parks history. Jim Crow history. Segregation history. And whether Sutton knew the full weight of what she was saying or had just absorbed it from her mother's coded language, the message was clear. You don't belong here with us. You belong somewhere lesser. Zephyr felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Sutton the satisfaction. She would not cry. She would not break. "Young lady." A new voice, firm and authoritative. Both girls turned. An elderly white man with silver hair and a stern expression stood a few feet away. He'd witnessed the entire exchange. His name was Harrison Finch, though Zephyr didn't know that yet. He was 73 years old, a retired federal judge, and he'd seen enough injustice in his life to recognize it immediately. "Return to your seat. Now." His voice left no room for argument. Sutton's confidence faltered. This was an adult. A white adult. Someone she'd been taught to respect, to listen to. "But I was just..." "Now," Mr. Finch repeated. Sutton's face flushed red. She shot Zephyr a look of pure hatred, a look that promised this wasn't over, and then stalked back to her seat. Mr. Finch turned to Zephyr. His expression softened. Are you all right, young lady? Zephyr nodded, not trusting her voice. What's your name? Zephyr, she managed. That's a beautiful name. Don't let people like that dim your light, Zephyr. Do you hear me? She nodded again, and this time a tear did escape, rolling down her cheek before she could stop it. Mr. Finch pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. A gentleman of the old school. Keep it, he said gently. And remember, their behavior says everything about them and nothing about you. Zephyr clutched the handkerchief and made her way back to seat 2A on shaking legs. She could feel every eye in first class on her. Some sympathetic. Some uncomfortable. Some deliberately looking away, not wanting to get involved. She sank into her seat and pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself as small as possible. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sutton returned to her seat next to her mother, and within seconds she transformed. Her face crumpled. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. Real-looking tears, the kind that come from years of practice getting out of trouble, of learning that victimhood could be weaponized. Mommy, she sobbed, her voice carrying across the cabin. That girl was so mean to me. Veronica immediately pulled her daughter close. What happened, baby? I was just going to the bathroom, Sutton sniffled, her story emerging between manufactured sobs. And she was there and she said horrible things to me. She told me I didn't belong here. She was so scary, Mommy. It was a complete fabrication. A total reversal of what had actually happened. But Veronica believed every word. Or maybe she just wanted to believe. Maybe it gave her an excuse to do what she'd wanted to do since the moment she saw Zephyr sitting in first class. Veronica unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up with the fury of a mother bear protecting her cub. Except in this case, the cub was the aggressor, and the mother was about to attack an innocent child. She marched directly to Zephyr's seat. Her heels clicked against the floor like gunshots. Zephyr looked up, her eyes still red from the tears she'd been fighting, and saw Veronica looming over her. The woman's face was twisted with anger, with righteous indignation, with something darker underneath. How dare you, Veronica hissed. How dare you bully my daughter? Zephyr's mouth fell open. I didn't. Don't you lie to me, Veronica cut her off. She told me everything. You threatened her. You told her she didn't belong here. The projection was astonishing. Accusing Zephyr of exactly what Sutton had done to her. Other passengers were watching now. The entire first-class cabin had gone silent. This was no longer a private confrontation. This was a public spectacle. I want to see your ticket, Veronica demanded, holding out her hand. Right now. Zephyr's voice came out shaky but clear. I don't have to show you anything. It was the right response. The only response. She didn't owe this woman anything. Not an explanation, not proof of her right to be there, nothing. But it enraged Veronica further. Where are your parents? She demanded, looking around as if expecting them to materialize. A child like you shouldn't be alone here. A child like you. There it was again. That loaded phrase. That reduction of Zephyr to nothing but assumptions based on her appearance. Zephyr's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. But she looked Veronica directly in the eyes and said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most powerful response. Ma'am? Marissa Chin appeared, her professional smile replaced with genuine concern. Is there a problem? Veronica whirled on her. Yes, there's a problem. This child has been harassing my daughter. I want her moved. Immediately. Move her to economy where she belongs. Where she belongs. Not where there's space or somewhere else. Where she belongs. As if first class was too good for someone like Zephyr. Marissa's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. She'd been a flight attendant for 12 years. She'd seen this before. Too many times. Ma'am, all passengers have valid tickets and assigned seats. I cannot and will not move anyone unless there's a legitimate safety concern. This is a legitimate concern, Veronica insisted. My daughter is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I paid good money for these tickets. I shouldn't have to sit near. She stopped herself. Caught herself. But everyone heard what she didn't say. Everyone filled in that blank. I shouldn't have to sit near her. Near them. Near people like that. The first-class cabin was completely silent now. The kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. The kind of silence where everyone knows something terrible is happening but no one quite knows how to stop it. Marissa drew herself up to her full height. Her voice remained professional, but there was steel underneath. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. If you continue to disturb other passengers, I'll have no choice but to inform the captain, and we'll have security waiting when we land." It was a threat. A necessary one. Veronica's face went white, then red, then white again. She'd pushed too far and she knew it. But pride wouldn't let her back down gracefully. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I have connections. I know people." Empty threats from someone who knew she'd crossed a line. She returned to her seat, pulling Sutton close, both of them whispering furiously. Sutton kept glancing at Zephyr with a mixture of satisfaction and confusion. She'd gotten what she wanted, the attention, the drama. But some small part of her seemed to recognize that this had gone too far. That they'd become the villains in a story she didn't fully understand. Zephyr sat frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead, seeing nothing. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribcage. Her hands were still shaking. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She'd never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so completely alone in her entire life. Marissa knelt down beside Zephyr's seat, her voice soft. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Do you need anything?" Zephyr shook her head. She didn't trust herself to speak. "You did nothing wrong," Marissa said firmly. "Do you hear me? Nothing." That woman was completely out of line. Zephyr nodded, but she didn't feel it. She felt like she'd done something wrong just by existing. Just by being herself in a space where people like Sutton and Veronica believed she didn't belong. After Marissa moved away to continue her duties, Zephyr reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over her mother's contact. She could call. She could tell her what happened. Chimamanda would be furious. She'd probably have the airline CEO on the phone within minutes. She could make this right. But that felt like giving up. Like admitting she couldn't handle this herself. Her mother had taught her to be strong. To stand on her own. To face adversity with grace and dignity. If she called now, crying and upset, wouldn't that prove Veronica right in some way? That she was just a child who didn't belong here? No. She had to handle this herself. Zephyr put her phone away and pulled her headphones back over her ears. She closed her eyes. Let the music wash over her. Mirabelle singing about how she wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough, didn't have what it took to be special. God, even her comfort music was cutting too close right now. In her mind, she replayed her mother's words. The ones Chimamanda had told her before every difficult moment in her life. "You are enough, Zephyr. Exactly as you are. Your worth doesn't come from what others think of you. It comes from who you choose to be in difficult moments." Who did she choose to be? Not vengeful. Not cruel. Not diminished. She chose to be dignified. She chose to rise above. She chose to prove, through her actions and her character, that she was better than their small-minded prejudice. Even if it hurt. Even if it felt impossible. Even if she was only 10 years old and shouldn't have to be this strong. She would handle this with grace. She would not let them break her. But the universe wasn't done testing her yet. About 20 minutes later, the beverage service began. Marissa and another flight attendant moved through the cabin with their cart, offering drinks and snacks to passengers. Zephyr asked for water. Just water. Her throat was dry from fighting back tears, and she didn't trust herself to consume anything more complicated. Marissa handed her a bottle of water and a small package of cookies. "On the house," she said with a kind smile. "You deserve something sweet." That small kindness almost broke Zephyr's composure entirely. She managed a wobbly smile and a whispered thank you. Then the cart moved to Sutton and Veronica's row. "Orange juice for my daughter," Veronica said. "And I'll have another champagne." The flight attendant poured the orange juice into a plastic cup and handed it to Sutton. The champagne flute went to Veronica. What happened next occurred in slow motion and yet too fast to prevent. Sutton stood up, supposedly to put something in the overhead compartment. She had to pass right by where the cart was positioned. Right by where Marissa was standing with a tray of drinks. As Sutton moved past, she stumbled. Or appeared to stumble. Her arm shot out, supposedly to catch her balance, and knocked directly into Marissa's tray. A full glass of cranberry juice, destined for another passenger, tipped over. And poured directly onto Zephyr. The cold liquid soaked into her hoodie, her jeans, her book that was sitting on her lap. Bright red juice staining everything it touched. The quantum mechanics book, already worn from constant reading, now had its pages bleeding together with sticky liquid. Zephyr gasped and stood up automatically, the book falling to the floor with a wet thud. Juice dripped from her clothes onto the seat, onto the floor. She looked down at herself and then up at Sutton. And Sutton was smirking. Just for a second. just long enough for Zephyr to see it. The satisfied curl of her lip. The gleam of accomplishment in her eyes. It hadn't been an accident. Not even close. Marissa saw it too. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." But before Marissa could even reach for napkins, Veronica's voice rang out. "Oh my, Sutton, be careful around other people's things." The emphasis on other people was deliberate. Loaded. As if Zephyr's ruined book and soaked clothes were the real tragedy here, not because a child had been deliberately targeted, but because Sutton had been careless with someone else's property. Someone lesser's property. Zephyr stood there, dripping, fighting back tears with everything she had. Her favorite hoodie was ruined. Her book, the one she'd been reading and rereading for months, was destroyed. And worst of all, she knew. She absolutely knew this hadn't been an accident. And there was nothing she could do about it. Marissa moved into action immediately, grabbing towels, napkins, anything to help clean up. "I'm so sorry. This is completely my fault. Please let me help. We'll get you new clothes if we have any that fit. We'll comp your entire meal. Whatever you need." The other flight attendant rushed to help as well, both of them genuinely distressed at what had happened. But Zephyr barely heard them. She was staring at her book on the floor. The pages were stuck together. Ink was running. All her notes in the margins, all her carefully placed bookmarks, everything was ruined. It was just a book. She knew that. Her mother could buy her 1,000 books. But this book had been with her through every late night of studying. Every breakthrough in her water filtration design. Every moment of doubt when she wondered if she was smart enough, good enough. And now it was destroyed. She bent down and picked it up carefully, cradling it like an injured bird. Juice dripped from its pages onto her already soaked sneakers. Marissa appeared with a blanket and a pile of napkins. "Honey, let's get you cleaned up. I have some spare airline shirts in the back. They'll be way too big, but they're dry." Zephyr finally found her voice. It came out quieter than she intended, but steady. Remarkably steady. "It's not your fault. Accidents happen." She looked directly at Sutton as she said the next part. "Even when they're not accidents." Sutton's smirk faltered. Just for a moment. Because Zephyr had called her out. Not explicitly enough to be accused of anything, but clearly enough that everyone who'd been paying attention understood. This hadn't been an accident. Veronica immediately jumped to her daughter's defense. "Are you accusing my daughter of something?" She stumbled. "It was an accident. How dare you suggest otherwise?" But her protests were too loud. Too insistent. Like someone who knew the truth and was desperate to bury it. Zephyr didn't respond. She simply took the blanket from Marissa, wrapped it around her shoulders, and allowed herself to be led to the bathroom to change. As she walked down the aisle, dripping juice, clutching her ruined book, wrapped in a blanket, she felt the weight of every eye on her. Some sympathetic. Some uncomfortable. Some deliberately looking away. She felt small. She felt humiliated. She felt like exactly what Sutton and Veronica had been trying to make her feel from the moment she'd stepped on this plane. Like she didn't belong. But she held her head up anyway. Because that's what her mother had taught her. That's what dignity looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain destroy you. In the bathroom, she peeled off her wet hoodie and put on the oversized airline shirt Marissa had given her. It hung on her small frame like a dress. She looked ridiculous. She looked like a child playing dress-up. She looked at herself in the mirror and finally let the tears fall. Silent tears that she'd been holding back for over an hour. Tears of frustration, of hurt, of the fundamental unfairness of being judged for something she couldn't control. Her skin color. Her appearance. The assumptions people made about her before she even opened her mouth. She cried for 2 minutes. Let it out. Let herself feel it. Then she wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and walked back out. When Zephyr returned to her seat, something had shifted in the cabin. The atmosphere had changed. Because while she'd been in the bathroom, someone else had decided they'd seen enough. Harrison Finch, the elderly man who'd intervened during the bathroom incident, stood up from his seat. At 73, he moved slowly but with undeniable authority. This was a man who'd spent 40 years as a federal judge. Who'd presided over civil rights cases. Who'd seen the worst of human behavior and the best of human courage. He'd been watching this entire situation unfold with increasing anger. When Zephyr walked past him, swimming in her oversized shirt, carrying her ruined book, trying so hard to maintain her dignity, something in him snapped. He turned to face Sutton and Veronica. His voice was not loud, but it carried. Everyone in first class could hear him clearly. "I've seen enough," he said. "Young lady," he addressed Sutton directly. "Your behavior is appalling. Sutton froze. Adults didn't usually call her out. Adults usually believed her, sided with her, gave her the benefit of the doubt. But Harrison Finch wasn't just any adult. He turned to Veronica. And you should be ashamed. That child, he gestured toward Zephyr, has shown more grace and dignity than you've shown this entire flight. Veronica's face flushed red. You don't understand. These days anyone can. Anyone can what? Mr. Finch interrupted. His voice was sharp now. Cutting. Be treated with human decency? Is that what you were going to say? That anyone can expect basic respect? The cabin was deadly silent. Everyone was watching. The confrontation they'd all witnessed but no one had fully addressed was finally being brought into the open. I saw what happened at the bathroom, Mr. Finch continued. I saw your daughter block that child's path. I heard what she said. And just now I saw her deliberately spill that drink. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. She stumbled, Veronica insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. She smirked, Mr. Finch countered. I saw it. Others saw it. And frankly, ma'am, I've seen your type before. People who think money or skin color, or some arbitrary measure of worth gives them the right to treat others as lesser. It's 2025 and yet here we are, still fighting the same battles. Other passengers began nodding, murmuring agreement. A black businessman in seat 4B spoke up. I saw it too. That girl deliberately knocked over that drink. A white woman in seat 1C added, and I heard what was said earlier. About programs and diversity initiatives. It was disgusting. Suddenly Veronica and Sutton weren't alone in their perspective. They were outnumbered. The silent witnesses who'd been uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene were finding their voices. Veronica stood up, pulling Sutton close to her in a protective gesture. But it looked less like protection and more like hiding. You people don't understand, she said, her voice rising with desperation. We're good people. We're not racist. We have black friends. You just what? Mr. Finch pressed. You just assumed that child didn't belong in first class because of how she looks? You just decided to make her flight miserable because she makes you uncomfortable? You just taught your daughter that it's acceptable to bully and discriminate. Sutton was crying now. Real tears this time, not fake ones. She looked confused, scared. She'd been caught. But more than that, she was beginning to realize that what she'd done was wrong. Actually wrong. Not just against the rules, but fundamentally, morally wrong. I'm sorry, Sutton whispered, but it was unclear if anyone heard her. Veronica's face had gone from red to pale. She looked around the cabin, seeing the faces of the other passengers. Seeing their judgment. Their disgust. She'd been exposed. Her carefully maintained image of respectability had crumbled. Everyone could see exactly who she was underneath the designer clothes and practiced smile. She sank back into her seat, pulling Sutton down with her, and stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The rest of the flight was going to be very uncomfortable for the Bellamy Cross family. But for Zephyr, something unexpected had happened. She'd been defended. Not by authority figures who had to intervene, but by ordinary passengers who decided that silence in the face of injustice was no longer acceptable. As Zephyr settled back into her seat, wrapped in her blanket, Mr. Finch caught her eye and gave her a small nod. A gesture of respect. Of solidarity. And Zephyr, for the first time since boarding this plane, felt a small spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because what none of these passengers knew, what would soon be revealed, would turn this entire situation on its head and teach everyone on this plane a lesson they'd never forget. If you're invested in Zephyr's story, if you want to see how this ends and what happens when the truth comes out, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Because what's coming next will shock you. And here's my question for you. Have you ever stood up for someone being treated unfairly, or wished you had? Have you ever been that person who found their voice when everyone else stayed silent? Share your story in the comments, because moments like what Mr. Finch did, they matter. They change things. They save people. Zephyr sat in her seat, her wet book drying slowly on the empty seat beside her, her oversized airline shirt making her look even smaller than she was, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to call her mother. She wasn't going to use her family's name or wealth or influence to make this right. She was going to let the truth reveal itself naturally. Because sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice isn't retaliation. It's simply continuing to be yourself until the truth becomes undeniable. And the truth was about to come out in the most unexpected way possible. For the next 15 minutes, the first-class cabin existed in an uncomfortable tension. Zephyr sat in her oversized airline shirt, trying to lose herself in her thoughts. Sutton and Veronica sat rigid in their seats, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The other passengers pretended to read magazines, watch movies, do anything to avoid acknowledging the elephant in the room. And then the intercom crackled to life. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice was warm, deep, with a slight Nigerian accent that made Zephyr's head lift slightly. She recognized the cadence. It sounded like home. "We're currently cruising at 35,000 feet, Captain Isaiah Washington continued. "Weather looks good all the way to New York. We should be landing right on schedule." Standard announcement. Nothing unusual. Passengers went back to their activities. But then the captain's voice changed. Became more personal. More intentional. "Before I sign off, I want to share something with you all. We have a very special passenger on board today." Zephyr's stomach dropped. Oh no. Her mother had promised. She'd made the airline promise. No announcements. No special treatment. Just a quiet flight where Zephyr could be a regular kid. But Captain Washington had other ideas. "Miss Zephyr Okafor is flying with us today to represent our continent at MIT's Global Youth Science Summit in Cambridge, Massachusetts." Every head in first class turned toward Zephyr. She sank lower in her seat, her face burning with embarrassment. This was the last thing she wanted. The absolute last thing. But the captain wasn't finished. "Now, you might be thinking, that's nice, a smart kid going to a science competition. But let me tell you exactly who Miss Okafor is and what she's accomplished." Zephyr closed her eyes. "Please stop. Please just stop." At 9 years old, Zephyr designed a solar-powered water filtration system. Not for a school project. Not for fun. But because she saw a problem and decided to solve it. The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the flight attendants had stopped what they were doing to listen. Her system is currently operational in 12 rural communities across Nigeria. It's providing clean, safe drinking water to over 15,000 people. 15,000 people who no longer have to walk miles for water. Who no longer get sick from contaminated sources. 15,000 lives changed because a child decided to use her brilliant mind to help others. Zephyr heard someone gasp. She didn't open her eyes to see who. At just 10 years old, she's already changing the world. She's already making a difference that most of us will never make in our entire lifetimes. The captain paused, letting that sink in. Now her mother, Dr. Chimamanda Okafor, specifically requested that we keep this quiet. She's raising her daughter to be humble, to not seek attention or praise. And I respect that. I respect that immensely. Another pause. But I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I make the final decisions about what happens on my plane. And I think excellence deserves recognition. I think brilliance deserves celebration. I think when a 10-year-old child is out here saving lives and changing the world, we should acknowledge that." Zephyr finally opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, but not from sadness this time. From overwhelming emotion. From being seen. From having her work, her passion, her purpose acknowledged by someone who understood. "So, Miss Okafor, on behalf of everyone on this flight, thank you. Thank you for representing us. Thank you for showing the world what African excellence looks like. Thank you for being exactly who you are." The cabin erupted. Applause. Loud, genuine, enthusiastic applause. It started in the back and rolled forward like a wave. Passengers stood up to see where she was sitting. To get a glimpse of this remarkable child. Zephyr looked around, overwhelmed. Mr. Finch was clapping and smiling at her with something like pride. The black businessman in 4B had tears in his eyes as he applauded. The white woman in 1C was standing, clapping hard, her earlier discomfort transformed into admiration. Marissa stood near the galley, clapping with her hands over her heart, her professional composure completely gone. And across the aisle, one row back, Sutton sat frozen with her mouth open. Her face had gone completely white. Her eyes were wide with shock, with disbelief, with the dawning realization of exactly who she'd been tormenting for the past hour. Veronica looked like she might be sick. The color had drained from her face. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the expression of absolute horror. Because she'd just realized something. She'd just understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd spent the entire flight treating a literal genius, a humanitarian, a child who was accomplishing more at 10 than Veronica had in 42 years, like she was less than human. The applause continued for what felt like forever but was probably only 30 seconds. Zephyr managed a small embarrassed wave, which only made people clap harder. Finally, mercifully, the captain came back on the intercom. All right, let's let the young lady have some peace. But I'm not quite done yet. Oh God. There was more. You see, I have another reason for making this announcement. Miss Okafor's mother, Dr. Chimamanda Okafor, is not just the parent of a brilliant child. She's also the founder and CEO of Next Tech Solutions, Africa's largest cloud computing and technology company. Veronica made a small choking sound. Sutton's hands flew to her mouth. Dr. Okafor's company has just partnered with our airline in a major sustainability initiative. She's helping us reduce carbon emissions across our entire fleet. Her team is implementing cutting-edge technology that will make us one of the most environmentally friendly airlines in the world. The captain's voice grew warmer, more personal. But here's the part that matters most to me and my crew. The Okafor Foundation, Dr. Okafor's charitable organization, has funded aviation scholarships for young Africans who dream of flying. They've provided training, education, and opportunities to hundreds of young people who otherwise would never have had the chance to enter this field. There was emotion in his voice now. Real emotion. In fact, the Okafor Foundation funded the scholarships that trained half of the flight crew you see serving you today. Including me. I grew up in a small village outside Lagos. My family couldn't afford university, let alone flight school. But the Okafor Foundation saw potential in me and invested in my dream. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face. She turned to look at Zephyr with an expression of shock and gratitude and wonder. Including your wonderful flight attendant, Marissa Chin, who's standing up there trying not to cry. The entire cabin turned to look at Marissa, who was indeed openly crying now. She looked at Zephyr and mouthed, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Zephyr hadn't known any of this. Her mother had never told her about the specific people they'd helped. Chimamanda believed in giving anonymously, in helping without expecting recognition or gratitude. But now the truth was out. And it was spreading through the cabin like wildfire. So when you see Miss Okafor sitting there in her oversized shirt, probably wishing I would stop talking about her, the captain's voice carried a smile. Remember that you're in the presence of greatness. Not because of her mother's wealth or success, but because of who she is, because of what she's accomplished, because of the lives she's touched. He paused one final time. Excellence comes in all colors, all ages, all backgrounds. It doesn't require designer clothes or expensive accessories. It just requires character, determination, and a heart that wants to make the world better. Miss Okafor has all of that and more. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be flying you to New York today. But I'm especially honored to be flying Zephyr Okafor. Thank you for your attention. We'll be landing in about 4 hours. The intercom clicked off. And then Mr. Harrison Finch stood up. Slowly, deliberately. He started clapping again. Not the enthusiastic applause from before. This was different. Slower. More purposeful. The kind of applause that demanded attention. One by one, every single passenger in first class stood. The businessman in 4B. The woman in 1C. A young couple in row 5. An elderly woman with white hair near the back. Every single person. They stood and they clapped. A standing ovation for a 10-year-old girl who'd spent the entire flight being treated like she didn't belong. Marissa walked over to Zephyr's seat, knelt down beside her and took her hand. "I had no idea," she whispered, tears still flowing. "Your mother's foundation paid for my entire training. I wouldn't be here without her. Without you." Zephyr squeezed her hand. "You would have found a way," she said softly. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." The applause finally died down. Passengers returned to their seats. But the atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed. People were smiling at Zephyr, nodding at her with respect. One woman raised her glass in a silent toast. And across the aisle, Sutton was crying. Real tears. Not the fake ones from before. Tears of shame, of horror, of understanding what she'd done. Veronica sat completely still, staring at nothing, her face ashen. Her hands were trembling. Her entire world had just collapsed. Because she'd built her identity on being better than others. On coming from the right background, knowing the right people, having the right connections. And she'd just spent the entire flight treating someone who was better than her in every measurable way like garbage. Someone whose mother had more wealth than Veronica could dream of. Someone who'd accomplished more at 10 than Veronica had in 4 decades. Someone who was objectively superior in every way Veronica claimed to value. Except for one thing. The only thing that had mattered to Veronica. Skin color. And that realization was destroying her. The silence that followed the applause was thick and uncomfortable. Passengers went back to their movies, their books, their conversations, but there was a palpable awareness of the two families across the aisle from each other. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Veronica unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up slowly like someone walking to their own execution. Her legs looked unsteady. She crossed the aisle to Zephyr's seat. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Shaking. Broken. We didn't know. Zephyr looked up at her. This woman who'd demanded to see her ticket. Who'd called her a bully. Who'd wanted her moved to economy where she belonged. This woman who'd spent the entire flight making her feel less than human. And Zephyr asked the question that cut deeper than any accusation could have. Would it have mattered if I wasn't those things? Veronica's mouth opened. Close. No sound came out. Zephyr continued, her voice gentle but firm. Clear. Each word carefully chosen. If I was just a regular girl flying to visit family? If my mother wasn't successful? If I hadn't invented anything or won any awards? She let the question hang in the air for a moment. Would I have deserved respect then? Veronica had no answer. Because they both knew the truth. No. She wouldn't have. Zephyr's accomplishments hadn't earned her basic human decency. They'd just exposed Veronica's prejudice in a way that was impossible to deny. My mom taught me that every person deserves dignity, Zephyr said. Not because of money or awards or what they've accomplished, but because we're all human. Every single one of us deserves to be treated with basic respect. Her eyes moved from Veronica to Sutton, who was watching with tears streaming down her face. You don't have to like me, Zephyr said directly to Sutton. You don't have to be my friend. You don't have to think I'm smart or special or anything. But you can't treat people like that. You just can't. The simplicity of it. The fundamental decency of it. It was a lesson that shouldn't have needed to be taught, but clearly did. Veronica tried to speak. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I never meant. But her apologies rang hollow. Because what was she apologizing for really? For being rude to someone accomplished? Or for being rude to someone she'd assumed wasn't? Would she be apologizing if Zephyr had been exactly who Veronica thought she was? A regular kid from a regular family flying on an economy ticket that had been upgraded? They both knew the answer. Veronica returned to her seat, pulled Sutton close and buried her face in her hands. She was humiliated. Completely, utterly humiliated. And she deserved every second of it. But Sutton was different. Another hour passed. The tension slowly dissipated as the flight continued. Passengers requested autographs from Zephyr, which she gave shyly. A young girl around 7 years old brought her a drawing she'd made, a picture of a smiling scientist. Zephyr accepted it with genuine delight and carefully tucked it into her backpack. But Sutton sat in her seat, crying silently. Not the manipulative tears from before. Real tears. The kind that come from genuine shame and regret. She'd been taught to think of people a certain way. She'd absorbed her parents' prejudices like a sponge. She'd never questioned whether it was right or wrong. She'd just accepted it as truth. But now she couldn't unsee what had happened. Couldn't unknow what she'd done. She'd bullied someone. Harassed them. Targeted them. And why? Because of how they looked. Because she'd been taught that some people were lesser. And she'd been so wrong. So completely, devastatingly wrong. About 30 minutes before landing, Sutton unbuckled her seatbelt. Her mother was sleeping or pretending to sleep, her face turned away from the aisle. Sutton walked slowly, hesitantly, to Zephyr's seat. Zephyr looked up from the new book Marissa had given her from the plane's library. Sutton's face was blotchy from crying. Her perfect hair was a mess. Her expensive clothes looked rumpled. She looked, for the first time since boarding, like what she actually was. A scared, confused kid. I'm sorry, Sutton whispered. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Zephyr closed her book and waited, letting Sutton say what she needed to say. My parents always say things about people who look different than us, Sutton continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. About how they're not as good. How they don't belong in certain places. How we're better because of, I don't even know why. Just because. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, completely forgetting about being ladylike or proper. I thought it was normal. I thought everyone thought that way. I didn't know it was wrong. I mean, I should have known. I'm not stupid. But I believe them. I believed my parents. Zephyr felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not quite yet. But understanding. Because Sutton was right about one thing. She was just a kid. A kid who'd been taught terrible things and hadn't known any better. It's not normal, Zephyr said quietly. And it's not okay. Sutton nodded, more tears falling. I know that now. But here's what's important, Zephyr continued. You can choose to be different than what you're taught. You can learn. You can grow. You can decide to be better. She thought about her own mother. About how Chimamanda had grown up poor, had faced discrimination, had been told she'd never amount to anything. And instead of becoming bitter or cruel, she'd become kind. She'd built a company that employed thousands. She'd created a foundation that helped others achieve their dreams. She'd chosen to be better than what the world tried to make her. You're 10 years old, Zephyr said to Sutton. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can choose what kind of person you want to be. Not what your parents tell you to be. What you choose. Sutton looked at her with something like hope. Like maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. Could be better. I'm sorry, she said again. For everything. For what I said. For the juice. For all of it. Zephyr nodded slowly. Okay. It wasn't quite forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. It was seeing Sutton as a child who'd made terrible mistakes but could still learn from them. Sutton returned to her seat. Veronica was awake now, watching. She didn't say anything. Just pulled her daughter close. They wouldn't become friends, Zephyr and Sutton. There was too much hurt, too much damage. But maybe, just maybe, something had shifted. Some seed had been planted. 30 minutes before landing, Zephyr did something unexpected. She asked Marissa for a napkin and a pen. On the napkin, in her careful handwriting, she wrote, "We're both just kids trying to figure out the world. The difference is you can still choose who you want to be. Choose kindness. Choose better. Z." Below it she wrote her email address. Not because she wanted to be friends, but because sometimes people needed to know that second chances existed. That growth was possible. She folded the napkin carefully and handed it to Marissa. "Can you give this to the girl in 3C? The blonde one?" Marissa looked at the folded napkin, then at Zephyr, then back at the napkin. "You're remarkable, you know that?" Zephyr shrugged. "My mom says everyone deserves a chance to be better. Your mom raised an incredible human being." Later, after the passengers had settled in for the final descent, Marissa delivered the napkin to Sutton. Sutton opened it, read it, and immediately started crying again. She clutched the napkin to her chest like it was precious. She would keep that napkin for years. Through middle school and high school. Through college. It would stay in her wallet, growing soft and worn at the edges. And every time she felt herself slipping into old patterns, old prejudices she'd learned from her parents, she'd pull out that napkin and remember. Remember the girl on the plane who'd shown her what grace looked like. What dignity looked like. What true class looked like. Sutton Bellamy Cross would never become friends with Zephyr Okafor. They'd never email. Never see each other again after that flight. But Sutton would become a social worker. Would dedicate her life to helping marginalized communities. Would actively work to dismantle the systems of prejudice she'd once participated in. And it all started with a napkin on an airplane. With a 10-year-old girl who chose kindness when cruelty would have been justified. The plane touched down at JFK Airport at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The landing was smooth, barely a bump. Captain Isaiah Washington came on the intercom one final time. "Welcome to New York, ladies and gentlemen. Local time is 3:47 p.m., temperature is a comfortable 68 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying with us today." Pause. "And Miss Okafor? Good luck at MIT. Make us proud. Though I know you will." The cabin erupted in applause one final time. Passengers stood, stretched, gathered their belongings. But many of them made a point of stopping by Zephyr's seat to say something encouraging. To wish her luck. To thank her for her work. The businessman in 4B handed her his card. "If you ever need anything, mentorship, connections, anything, please reach out." The elderly woman from the back row gave her a hug. "You remind me of my granddaughter. Smart, strong, beautiful. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." Even some of the economy passengers who'd heard about what happened came to first class to meet her. Zephyr accepted it all with grace, with humility, with genuine gratitude. But she was exhausted. Emotionally drained. Ready to see her mother. Sutton and Veronica were among the last to deplane. They didn't make eye contact with anyone. Just gathered their things and left quickly, quietly, like people fleeing a crime scene. As Zephyr walked up the jet bridge, Marissa walked beside her, carrying her backpack. "Your mother is going to be so proud of you," she said. "Please don't tell her what happened," Zephyr said quickly. "She'll worry. She'll feel guilty for letting me fly alone." Marissa smiled. "Your secret is safe with me. But Zephyr, what you did today, how you handled all of that, that's something to be proud of. You could have been cruel. You could have used your family's name and power to destroy those people. But you chose dignity instead. My mom says that's the only choice that matters. Your mom is right. They reached the gate. And there she was. Dr. Chimamanda Okafor stood waiting, scanning the crowd for her daughter. At 43 she was stunning. Tall, elegant, wearing a simple but perfectly tailored dress. Her natural hair was styled in a sophisticated twist. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built an empire and remained humble. But the moment she saw Zephyr, all that sophistication melted away. Her face broke into the biggest smile and she rushed forward. My love. She swept Zephyr into a hug, lifting her off the ground despite Zephyr's protest that she was too old for that. Hi, Mom, Zephyr mumbled into her mother's shoulder, suddenly feeling like she might cry again. Chimamanda pulled back, holding Zephyr at arm's length, studying her face. How was the flight, my love? Everything okay? Zephyr thought about lying. Thought about saying it was fine, easy, uneventful. But her mother had taught her never to lie. And besides, she was tired of carrying the weight of what had happened alone. Educational, Mom. Really educational. Chimamanda's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew her daughter. Knew when something was being left unsaid. But she also knew when to push and when to let things come out naturally. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it. Let's get your luggage and head to the hotel. You must be exhausted. As they walked through the airport together, Chimamanda's arm around Zephyr's shoulders, Zephyr felt the tension of the past 6 hours slowly drain away. She was safe. She was with her mother. She was home even though they were thousands of miles from Lagos. Behind them, scattered throughout the airport, were the other passengers from Flight 447. Each carrying their own thoughts, their own lessons from what they'd witnessed. Mr. Harrison Finch called his daughter and told her about the remarkable young girl he'd met. He'd spend the next week writing an op-ed about dignity in the face of discrimination that would be published in the New York Times. Marissa would go home and donate to the Okafor Foundation, specifically requesting her contribution go toward aviation scholarships for young women. The businessman in 4B would reach out to his network and help secure additional funding for Zephyr's water filtration project. And somewhere in a taxi heading to the Upper East Side, Sutton held a napkin and cried while her mother stared out the window in silence, both of them beginning the long, difficult process of confronting who they really were. 1 week later, Zephyr stood on stage at MIT's Global Youth Science Summit. She was wearing a simple blue dress her mother had bought her, her butterfly locks styled beautifully, her natural confidence restored. She presented her water filtration system to a room full of scientists, engineers, and academics who were 3, 4, 5 times her age. She spoke clearly, passionately, intelligently about the problem she'd identified and the solution she'd engineered. When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. She won first place. Obviously. But the real victory, as she would tell her mother later, had happened 30,000 feet in the air on a Tuesday afternoon. The real victory was choosing dignity over vengeance. Grace over cruelty. Understanding over hatred. The real victory was teaching a cabin full of adults what true wealth looked like. Not money. Not status. Not designer clothes or first-class tickets. Character. Kindness. The courage to be yourself in the face of prejudice and hate. That was real wealth. That was real power. That was what mattered. 3 years later, Sutton Bellamy Cross would write an essay for her high school application. She'd write about a girl on a plane who taught her that prejudice was learned, but so was kindness. That you could choose to be better than what you were taught. She'd write about how a napkin with a few words changed the trajectory of her entire life. She'd write about how shame, when confronted honestly, could become the catalyst for growth. She wouldn't name Zephyr. Wouldn't tell the full story. But she'd acknowledge that someone had shown her grace when she deserved judgment, and that gift had changed everything. 5 years later, Zephyr would give a TED Talk about her experience. She'd talk about the flight, about the discrimination, about the choice to respond with dignity. The talk would go viral. Tens of millions of views. It would spark conversations about raising children without prejudice. About how to respond to discrimination. About what true class and character look like. And somewhere in Chicago, working as a social worker helping immigrant families, Sutton would watch that TED Talk and cry. Because she'd recognize herself in the story. Recognize her younger self in the villain. She'd send an email to the address on the napkin she'd kept all these years. Just 3 words. Thank you. I'm better. Zephyr would reply. Just 2 words. I know. But all of that was in the future. For now, in a hotel room in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Zephyr sat with her mother and finally told her everything that had happened on the flight. Chimamanda listened without interrupting. Her face went through a range of emotions. Anger. Sadness. Pride. And finally, something like understanding. When Zephyr finished, Chimamanda pulled her daughter close. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of hatred. Not at 10 years old. Not ever. But I did deal with it, Mom. And I'm okay." Chimamanda pulled back to look at her daughter's face. "You're more than okay. You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" Zephyr shrugged. "I just did what you taught me." "No, my love. You did what I taught you and then you did something more. You extended grace to someone who absolutely didn't deserve it. That's not something I taught you. That's something that came from who you are. Your heart. Your spirit." She kissed Zephyr's forehead. "I raised you to be humble despite our wealth. To never think you're better than anyone else because of money or success. But today you learned something I couldn't teach you. You learned that your worth isn't determined by other people's ignorance. It's determined by how you choose to respond to that ignorance." Zephyr nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes again. "And you chose beautifully," Chimamanda said. "You chose to be exactly who you are. Kind, dignified, strong. That's who you'll always be. No matter what anyone says. No matter where you go. You'll always be my Zephyr. Like the west wind. Gentle but powerful. Subtle but undeniable." They sat together in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, both understanding that something important had happened. Some lesson had been learned that would shape Zephyr for the rest of her life. Not the lesson that prejudice existed. She'd known that already. But the lesson that she had the power to choose her response to it. That her dignity couldn't be taken from her. Only surrendered. And she would never surrender it. Zephyr went on to do incredible things with her life. At 15 she'd have 3 patents. At 18 she'd be accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. At 25 she'd start her own company focused on sustainable technology for developing nations. But when interviewers asked about her proudest moment, about when she knew she could change the world, she always thought back to that flight. To being 10 years old, wearing an oversized airline shirt, holding a ruined book and choosing dignity anyway. That was the moment. Not winning at MIT. Not her patents or her company or her success. The moment she chose to be kind when cruelty would have been justified. The moment she saw a scared, misguided child instead of a villain. The moment she extended grace to someone who'd shown her none. That was when she knew. That was when she understood that true power wasn't about money or influence or status. True power was the ability to choose who you wanted to be, especially in your worst moments. And Zephyr Okafor, at 10 years old, 30,000 feet in the air, had made that choice. She'd chosen to be extraordinary. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between responding with anger or grace? Where someone treated you unfairly, judged you wrongly, hurt you deliberately, and you had to decide who you wanted to be in that moment? What would you have done in Zephyr's position? Would you have called your mother? Used your family's name to make those people pay? Or would you have chosen the harder path? The path of dignity, of grace, of teaching through example? Share your stories in the comments. Because these moments, these choices, they define us. They show us who we really are when the world strips away everything comfortable and familiar. And remember this, because it's the most important lesson from Zephyr's story. Your worth isn't determined by others' ignorance. It's not determined by their prejudice, their assumptions, their small-minded judgments. Your worth is determined by your response to it. By who you choose to be when someone tries to make you feel less than. By whether you let their hatred diminish your light or whether you shine even brighter in defiance. Zephyr Okafor taught an airplane cabin full of adults what dignity looks like. She didn't need her mother's billions to do it. She didn't need her awards or her accomplishments or her genius. She just needed to be herself. Kindly, firmly, unapologetically. And that, more than any amount of money, more than any achievement, more than anything else, is what true wealth looks like. True class. True power. It's measured not in bank accounts but in character. Not in what we have but in how we treat each other when no one's watching. Or in Zephyr's case when everyone is. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it changed something in how you see the world, hit that subscribe button right now. Because stories like this, stories about real courage and real character, they matter. They change things. They change us. And we need more of them. More stories about choosing kindness. More stories about extending grace. More stories about 10-year-old girls who teach the world what it means to be truly extraordinary. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Zephyr's story. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes that dignity, kindness, and character still matter in this world. Because they do. They always have. They always will.